Black Girl, White Girl talk got started as a result of rising racial tensions in Chicago in 2015. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country and has a long history of racial tensions. Up until the 1960s, black people could not get housing loans in the majority of areas of the city. There was even zoning regulations that prohibited property owners from renting or selling property to blacks. From the 1930s to the late 1960s, 80% of properties in the city contained these property deed restrictions. Today, the racial makeup of the city is largely unchanged, with the majority of blacks residing in the south and west sides of the city. Many, but not all of those black neighborhoods are low income with high crime rates. In 2015, an unarmed young black man was shot 16 times by a white Chicago police officer. It took 16 months for the officer who shot him to be charged. Many outraged Chicagoans of all races took to the streets to protest the shooting, the delay in the charges, and the ongoing state of racial disparity and unrest in the city. About this time, a diverse group of women in Chicago decided to open up a dialogue about racial experiences in an effort to promote understanding. Each woman was asked to spend some time thinking about an experience from their childhood or as an adult that had an impact on them regarding race and how that experience affected them or their perception of race. It was then decided to expand on this idea, to create a forum for women in the Chicagoland area to share their experiences about race. 3 of the women decided to work together to create a website, YouTube channel, Facebook page, and podcast to feature the videos or audio of women sharing their racial experiences. This is the Chicago Women's Race Project called Black Girl, White Girl Talk. Since the racial disparity and tensions in Chicago largely exist between blacks and whites, most of the participants will be black or white, but the project will also feature women of other races as well.
My name is Renita Alexander. I'm from a small town, Florence, Alabama. It's the northwest part of the state. I am the oldest of 5. I grew up in a Christian home. My earliest memories of race in Alabama are probably remembering segregated facilities, segregated entrances, the white and colored restrooms, water fountains, etc. I remember having to go to the balcony of the one theater in town. In the late 60s, my parents moved our growing family to the suburbs, and we lived in this black cul-de-sac called Haviland Drive, of a black cul-de-sac because it was black families. And at the point where Haviland Drive intersected with the next street, we experienced, I guess, what you would call white flight as white families moved to other neighborhoods. The 6 blocks from where Haviland Drive was to Harlan Elementary was initially all white, and now it's predominantly black. We were among the first blacks, my sister and I were among the first blacks to attend Harlan Elementary, and you know, it was fine. You know, we were curious, the kids were curious, the teachers treated us, you know, like any other kids, at least that was the feeling. We socialized on the playground, but the socializing ended, you know, ended once the bell rang. We weren't invited to, you know, socialize after it. We didn't get invitations to the birthday parties. Harlan Elementary was where I heard the N-word for the very first time. And what I found interesting is that the kids had made friends with me. This was, of course, prior to busing. Didn't know me. Some of them didn't know me in high school, and then in high school, you know, some of my white friends, you know, didn't know me when I went to the University of Alabama, when we all attended the University of Alabama, which was interesting. You know, I was a cheerleader. I was on the, you know, school newspaper, so it's like you know, I was kind of well known in my high school, and what I understood is that racism is learned. It's taught. The incident that I really wanted to talk about was what happened this past year with my family. We've been doing family vacations for a few years now, and for the last couple of years we've gone to Martha's Vineyard. And Martha's Vineyard is where President Obama and his family have vacationed over the years at least that they've been in the White House. And it's a resort area where blacks initially went with their employers in the late 1890s, and then they came back and bought houses and invited their friends. And we were in Oak Bluffs, which I've read is about 50% black during the summer. And so the house we were staying in, it's over 100 years old. It's been renovated. It's a beautiful home owned by a black family. And so my family and I flew to Boston, and then the next day we rented an SUV and took the ferry to Martha's Vineyard. We weren't in Martha's Vineyard for an hour when we got pulled over. And the anxiety in the car was palpable. My brother, I just remember him feeling the need to say, say yes, sir, just be calm. And, we got pulled over. The cop, let us know that we were doing 35 in a 25 mile per hour zone. And so he didn't give us a ticket. He let us go with a warning. But the discussion afterward that we had with our family was just really interesting. And we're all college educated, tax-paying homeowner professionals. And, the discussion was, is that enough? And so what the activities and the state of race in the United States over the last couple of years has led me to do is be more politically active. I've been working with some activists, but it's also made me realize that the way we solve racism in the United States is through relationships, and so that's why I'm very happy to be working with this project and talking about race with my friends.
Hi, I'm Nicole Miller. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in one of the somewhat diverse neighborhoods in the city, Beverly. One of my earliest memories of race was at Sleepaway Camp as a child. This camp was not very diverse. I was about one of 3 black children who were at the camp. I remember the last year that I went, one of the performances that they had in the evening. All of the camp counselors, they dressed in costumes that evening. I look up, I see one of the costumes, buckwheat, complete with an afro wig and a painted face. At 10, I didn't understand the history behind blackface or minstrel shows or what they meant and how they were used to mock black people. But what I did know in that moment was how uncomfortable and confused I felt. Why are all these other kids laughing? Why is this funny to them? Why am I not laughing? Why don't I find this funny? Why does this make me feel this way? Needless to say, that was the last year I was at that camp. Of course, I told my mother and father what happened. They were not pleased. I never went back. I think back on my childhood and stories that my mom has told me. She told me of the difficulty when she was putting me into schools and trying to decide where I would go to school. The neighborhood elementary school, there were 2 of them. One was a little better than the others, and it actually had more white children. The other school was more black children. Now, my mom wanted me to go to the better school, and so when she went to enroll me into the school, they said, no, she needs to go to the other school. That's based on where you live, that's where you need to go. My mom had to nicely remind them that there were kids on our block who lived further away from the nicer school who were going to that school. I got into the school, obviously. They wanted to avoid the headache that my mom was causing. In that same neighborhood, my sister had memories of her friends being able to come over to the house and have fun and play and just enjoy that time. But when it came time when they were having their pool parties and things like that, my sister didn't get invited. None of the black kids did. My mom stopped letting my sister hang out with those friends. Jump ahead some years, I was in high school. In high school I took mainly the honors and AP classes and had a lot of friends in the same classes with me. I remember one of my classmates, who was kind of my friend, she made a comment one day that she was upset she didn't get into the University of Michigan, and she said it was because of affirmative action. Of course, I then proceeded to tell her, well, I got into the University of Michigan. She then tells me, well, you're different. That's different. You're smart. What do you mean by that? I'm smart? Oh, I'm different from the other black people because I'm smart? She really didn't understand what she said, or why I was offended, or why I looked at her like she had 4 heads. She just didn't get it. That same year, one of my teachers, my theology teacher actually, made a comment again, University of Michigan. She says my son didn't get into the University of Michigan for law school. My sister was in law school there at the time. That's what went through my head in class. I didn't say it. I should have said something. I didn't at the time. I just felt uncomfortable, didn't know what to say as a child. Now, as an adult, I would have said something. I just look at my day-to-day life and the things that happen and the day-to-day encounters that you have with people. From being followed around in a store, from having difficulty getting a cab sometimes. Things like that are very frustrating and annoying. This has been my experience in Chicago. It's varied. I've had a great time here. I love this city, but I've also had a frustrating time in the city. And just hopefully at some point, things will get better.
My name's Julie Worley, and I grew up in a northwest suburb of Chicago, which was an all-white, mainly middle upper class neighborhood. I didn't have any white friends and didn't see many black kids or people on TV at all at the time. But when I was grade school age, my parents participated in a program where kids from the inner city, partially because there was a lot of violence at the time. It was in the early 60s when there were some race riots and some bad things happening in the city. So some of the community organizations and churches got together and had the kids from the city come out to stay with some people from the suburbs. We had 4 or 5 kids that were black that were staying with us. I remember that a couple of them didn't know what electricity was, so they must have been living in extreme poverty at the time. To me, it just seemed normal. We just played dress up. There's pictures of us playing in my backyard. One of the boys, his name was Chris, he ended up coming back and staying with us for a couple of summers, and we used to go camping as a child. So he came with us, and we were staying in all-white campgrounds, and I didn't notice that it was unusual to have a black child with us, but my parents did say that they did get a lot of looks and stares from people, but it seems like I was pretty oblivious at that time to race and what was going on. But as I got older and I moved into the city and started to become a lot more aware of how segregated Chicago was and how really unusual it was for people to really be mixing as far as friendships and being together. And I remember one particular instance where I was with a friend of mine that I had met at college, and we were at a mall and we were just walking down going to different shops, and it was amazing to me how people were just blatantly staring at us, because they think it was just shocking that they saw 2 women, a white woman and a black woman, together. And it makes you a little bit self-conscious, because you don't really know what people are thinking. I also have a niece who's black, and she has come and stayed with me several times, and I was living out of state, and we were going to get gas and get some snacks, and we drove in, and I could tell there was a man outside the store, and he was staring, and he could see that my niece was black and I was white, and so he was blatantly giving us a lot of dirty looks. And so when we got out of the car, I was watching him, and I noticed that he went around to the back of my car after we got inside and was looking at my license plate. And I assume he was looking at the license plate because he wanted to know where we were from and if we were from there. And the whole thing was just very unsettling and disturbing. And it was probably the most blatant experience I've had as far as somebody really seeming very racist. And then my daughter sometimes would go out with my niece, and they'd go to a store and they would get dirty looks from store owners, and it made her uncomfortable as well. As a white person, I have never been marginalized or discriminated against, and I have for a very large part taken my privilege just for granted, as I think most white people do. But it hurts me when I see people that I care about, people that are good people and just trying to go about their lives, and they're not able to do that because they are facing these difficulties that I've never had to face. And it hurts me and it upsets me. I feel that most people don't understand that this is an ongoing problem. They think it's a problem that was abolished years ago with slavery, or that it was going on in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s, but I don't think they realize that it's still going on today. And I think when we can understand each other and hear the experiences, because I've learned so much, I didn't myself realize that this was as big of a problem as it is until really over the last few years, and it's really come to light, particularly with some of the tensions that have risen in Chicago, which is such a great city that I do love, and there's a lot of really great people that live here. I'm hoping that through this project we can understand each other's experience a little bit more, which I think can lead to healing for the situation.